Hey, Eric, how's it going?
Not bad, Justin. How are you doing?
Doing great. And welcome everybody who may or may not be joining us. I guess you may be seeing this like 30 seconds after I said this, but yeah, welcome everybody. It's the new year. New
Woo!
us. We look totally different now.
Yeah, we got that 2023 shine going.
Yeah, exactly. I got the my beard is like a half centimeter longer.
Nice. And
It's
mine
pretty
is
awesome.
just as clean shaven as it's been.
Yeah, I think you clean shaved just before this, don't you?
I do every morning. Thursday morning,
There's
I make sure
is
I
your shave day.
it's my shave day.
Mm. I can't. I it's when I shave my face now, it looks weird.
Yeah.
Or even just like shaving the mustache. Like suddenly you look at your lip and you're like, my upper lip is way longer than I remember it being. So
I have to say I don't quite have that, but I haven't had a beard in years since pre-COVID. Actually, no, I did have one in COVID, like 2020,
hmm.
at
Yeah,
the end of
yeah.
2020. Yeah,
I
that
found
was
myself watching like shows. I watched on Netflix. There's a book adaptation called The Pale Blue Eye, which is it's like a murder mystery of a constable that is called into West Point circa like 1830, and a young Edgar Allan Poe helps him solve a mystery of like these people who are getting mutilated in death, like with their hearts removed. Um, but it's Christian Bale who plays the constable, and I do not remember the actor's name who plays Edgar Allan Poe, but Christian Bale is rocking like a really thick mustache and beard, and I find myself going like, I want my mustache to look like that. So it's like that's some sweet facial hair. Um, and now I'm like, maybe I'll grow my mustache out and make it like super thick, like I
yeah.
did I think
Well,
in like 2020 during COVID when I stopped shaving like completely.
yeah, yeah. I have decided at this point, at least for the time being, that during COVID, which I can still consider it to be COVID,
Yeah,
I'm going to be continuing to mask up, and therefore having the shaved beard is actually quite helpful for that. It turns out.
I may find that like my beard filters everything.
Yeah. Oh yeah,
So,
so you got like your
thick mat
flavor
of hair
saver
that
going.
filters all my. No, the worst part about wearing masks is that your facial hair gets messed up.
Oh, if you have facial hair, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, because
It
either
also,
you have it not over your chin, and instead it's like here, and then where you put it over your chin, and then like by the time you take off your mask, your beard is like shaped on profile like this, and
yeah.
it's just like, well, that's terrible.
It's like having wearing headphones all day, and you get those like you get the
Oh, that
cups, the indentation on your hairs,
yeah.
unless you shave your head a lot, or have it very very short. But
The other thing I've done is like tuck my beard into my mask.
yeah,
So um, either way, it's a good
mhm,
time.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, Christian Bale has a really awesome mustache in that movie. I was like, oh man, I want my mustache to look like that.
Says the guy who had the handlebar with the little like rotated things for
Yeah, I could just
a
never
year or
commit to
two.
it growing it that long because as it gets thicker, it still cut off the sides just enough.
Yeah.
Um, anyways,
Anyways, yeah,
let's get in. Let us get into the news recap. Um, it's been kind of a slow week in news. I imagine it's going
yes,
to pick up a bit as we get into a year full of big game releases. Um, but
possibly
uh,
less full than it had been as of a week ago.
yeah, yeah, right. It has.
So
Although, well, whatever. We'll
we'll
go
cover
into that
that.
afterwards.
Yeah.
You want to recap what we're going to be going over?
Yeah, sure. So we're going to hit three news topics that we have identified as being sort of for the news week relatively significant for the industry itself, saying something about the game industry rather than particular games or rumors or anything like that. So the topics we're going to cover today are Ubisoft, Ubisoft, sometimes shortened
UB
to
stocks. Yeah.
Ubistocks, yeah. Ubisoft stock slump as it slashes three titles. That's sort of what I was alluding to earlier. The UK's CMA extends its investigation into the Microsoft Blizzard deal. And then third and finally, Microsoft kicks off the year with an Xbox Direct. So we're going to dig into those. The third one's sort of more exciting about like how Microsoft is starting to change its marketing tactics, and we're going to dig into that.
Yeah, it's actually quite a significant change.
Yes.
I'd say, especially given from like their COVID era advertising, like the stuff like for like the Xbox launch, which was kind of like a mess, to where we are today, where they've adopted other tactics. So
yeah, it sounds like they might have have a Xbox Game Studio native marketing team now.
Yeah,
Instead of
hopefully.
just we'll
The
see.
Microsoft
But,
advertising team is like, okay, we need synergy. It's like, no, you don't. The Xbox platform and Microsoft do not have to be seen as one whole package.
right.
But anyways,
So,
yeah,
do you want to cover Ubisoft's situation?
yeah. I mean, it's kind of an unfortunate situation.
Yeah,
Ubisoft, which is one of the major developers for a long time,
publishers. Yeah,
well, yeah, publishers. Yeah, what do I call them?
developer
Developers.
publisher.
Yeah, they're
They do
both,
both.
right?
Yep.
Because most of it's internal studios that have the Ubisoft moniker.
Yep.
Anyways, one of the major publishers for a long time is now seeing quite a significant slump in its ability to produce games and make profit. So to capture all of what's been going on, this has been going on since like 2020, if not a little bit longer. But they've had a really difficult time either like keeping titles going. They've canceled quite a few. Their titles that they have published underperforming, or delaying titles that have been awaited. Most recently, Riders Republic, Far Cry 6, Watch Dogs Legion. I think we can include Mario Rabbids. What the heck's it called? Rabbids Mario
Spark of Hope.
Spark of Hope.
Yeah.
Just the latest Just Dance game. All of them have seen a sales slump. It's not to say they performed really poorly. It's not that that's quite the case. They've probably been profitable to some degree, but they're very expensive games that they're producing, and they're not performing the way they expected to carry the failures and successes of the other published Ubisoft games and the weight of all their publishing teams or development teams. So they've seen really problematic initial sales runs with those. A lot of those games got pretty steep discounts before the 6-month mark, which is not that common. We also found out that Splinter Cell VR and Ghost Recon Frontline were canceled in July, along with 4 other titles that we don't know about, but we found out those were canceled in July. As was Avatar, which I guess is highly awaited. I'm not sure. Avatar's hard to get a beat on because
Avatar was delayed until 2023, 2024.
Correct. But I don't know if it's long awaited, right? Like the Avatar game, like what they showed off, I think it was at one of the Sony press conferences, was pretty impressive looking. But I don't know what the appetite for Avatars games are there. I don't think there've really been one, not that I remember.
Just to be clear for those who may be confused by Avatar, it's the James Cameron movie cinematic thing, not the Nickelodeon like cartoon Avatar.
Right.
This is an IP from the cinematic space.
Yeah. Which, to be fair, they probably assume is going to be a big title, given that I think Way of Water has now broken $1 billion.
Yes,
in
it
revenues,
has.
or in ticket sales, not revenues.
Right.
But either way, the Avatar game was bumped. I think it was originally targeted to be released around the time the movie was going to be released, but it's now been delayed into like a nebulous time frame of 2023, 2024. Prince of Persia: Sands of Time remake, which was, when shown, was pretty heavily panned because of the way it looked. Like, it didn't look like a remake that people were expecting. It looked like, I think most people's criticisms were towards the art direction not looking as clean as they were hoping for like a next gen game. So that got an indefinite delay. And then in 2023, we were supposed to see, I think early 2023, we were supposed to see the Assassin's Creed Mirage, which have now slipped into a 2023-2024 time period. and as most people know, is that the Assassin's Creed games are I think their biggest moneymaker at this point, if not has been for a long time. And then this week, on top of all of that news and all this sort of like bad run of games on their end, it was announced that 3 other games were canceled on top of the 4 that were canceled that were like announced to be canceled in July. 3 games, we don't know what they are. When they announced it, they said it was 3 AAA games they were planning to release, and then there was a handful of smaller games that probably were mobile or some other type of lower IP. Um, and then we also got the news that Skull and Bones, which was announced to launch on, I think it was March 4th or March 9th, was the original release date. After having been delayed multiple times before that, also got put into a nebulous 2023-2024 window.
This is its 6th delay.
It's 6th delay, yeah.
Yeah, it's
I
been
mean,
in
and we're not even
development since,
talking
like,
about Beyond Good and Evil 2 or whatever they're calling
no.
that.
Yeah,
Which
yeah,
was shown off, I think, like 5 years ago now.
something on
And
that order. So is Skull and Bones, or at least it was announced.
yes,
You know, I think it was a Assassin's Creed 4
yeah, it's Black
or
Flag.
Black Flag. Yeah, it was like they took they thought there was something to the sailing part of that
Yeah.
game, and they sort of brought a team off and started developing it and built it up, and then they had people go in and out. There's a whole there are huge journalistic products on the web, articles that were written where people have gone through the history of
Just
of
Skull
the
and
development of
Bones.
that game.
Yeah.
Of just that game, to talk about like here's why this is such a weird situation. And it's still going on, clearly, because it just got bumped
Yeah.
again.
Yeah.
And this is, there's questions about maybe they're trying to cancel it, but there are government interventions saying you can't because you'd have to lay off the employees, and you can't do that. This would be Singapore, because Ubisoft, one of their international companies, is in Singapore. So this might just be a thing
I
where they're
assume
just
Montreal as well has some hooks to them about what they're able to do, given that I think if you were a Montreal publisher that took advantage of the tax incentives Montreal was available, they're probably liable for hamstrung to some degree about how they handle their employees and how they handle the titles being released.
right.
So anyways, this was all announced as part of a $200 million cost-cutting measure that I think is new in relation to the holiday sales. This is mostly the Rabbids game and Just Dance not hitting their expectations. So the 7 titles being axed were part of a $200 million cost-cutting measure. These are all 7 AAA title games that we do not know the status of. We don't know what they were. I'm sure years from now we'll start hearing people talk about it. But and then as a result of all this bad news, the Dow Jones saw that Ubisoft took, I think, a total of a 14% hit on its stock value as of I think it was like Wednesday.
Yeah, it was the day that they announced it, and this was done. This announcement was a part of a emergency earnings call for investors, where the Ubisoft had to come on and basically explain that the numbers that they had expected for the holiday season did not come close to their expectations, and therefore they had to take these drastic measures of, as you mentioned, canceling like 7 games and doing a bunch of other stuff. On the call, they also mentioned that they were going to allow certain of their resources to depreciate, which means that they're going to be taking a bit of a loss and not continuing to invest in those things for specifically R&D on their end for theoretically future development of games. So and that is outside of the 200 million euro, 214 million USD cut that they were making across their various studios throughout the world.
Right. So I mean, overall bad news for Ubisoft.
Not a great day.
Yeah, and it probably means that there's layoffs to come. So if you appreciate their games, hold a candle for the Ubisoft employees that are probably going to be getting the axe And if you're part of the game development community or you are part of a studio, keep an eye out for some rogue
Sudden available talent.
Ubisoft employees that may need some attention on their resumes.
Yeah.
So given that, I mean, what does this look like for Ubisoft? Like, are they really in trouble, or you know?
Yeah, I don't. It's hard to say with the full, without having a full view. I mean, Ubisoft as a company is huge, and they have, as we mentioned, worldwide studios, 7 to 9 development studios, maybe more,
Yeah,
uh, littered throughout the globe. They can effectively work around the clock, constantly have someone working on something for Ubisoft.
yeah,
Now, they don't necessarily have all that working on the same game, or at least all the same parts of a single game, but they're definitely they've embraced the international space for doing development. Uh, Certainly, this is not good. I think if I were Ubisoft right now, I would be taking a step back and looking at the state of the IP. They did the language that they used explained that they're currently in an investment phase, which I believe means that they are putting in a whole bunch of time and money to develop out sort of big titles for that they're investing money and resources into these big titles that theoretically should pay dividends. Does that mean that they're developing new IP? It doesn't look like it because all the we don't know with the titles that they didn't announce, at least not yet until
yeah.
people's NDAs go away. I mean, we might be able to hear what those were, but as of right now, there's no, or someone leaks it, but right now there's no news about that. It's possible that they were investing into new IP, but it may not have mattered in the end because those that become write-offs at this point where they're trying
Right.
to save money and make sure they can keep going. The concern that I have is looking at the titles that they had apparently been banking on were, the Rabbids game apparently is. I don't know what their sales expectations were. It strikes me as an odd title to pin lots of hope on big returns on, given that it's effectively a strategy game. And I'm not sure I know of a strategy title that has sold enough to sort of float a large studio, a large company. I mean, it's usually like a padding title. It's a title that studios, Nintendo with Advance Wars, Square Enix with the Tactics series of like Final Fantasy Tactics and those kinds of games. They release them to sort of help give fans more and play to a very core audience, not a broad one. And Ubisoft, this to me feels like it's a core game instead of a broad game. And given that games, the broad one like Just Dance underperformed, that's sort of like, well, okay, now to me we are seeing core games that may be underperforming as well as the broad games. And the broad games, the concern there is, for me, looking at it on the outside, my personal opinion is maybe Ubisoft needs to take a step back and reevaluate the freshness of its IP. A lot of the games like Splinter Cell, is it Tom Clancy that they have as well?
Well, it's Tom Clancy, and Splinter Cell's part of Tom Clancy.
But that's the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then there's Ghost Recon. Is Ghost Recon part of that thing as
Yeah,
well?
that's part of Tom Clancy too.
Yeah. So all of that is the Tom Clancy stuff. Then you have Far Cry, which they were at 6. Then Assassin's Creed, Just Dance. I guess they have the Rabbits. They have a bunch of other small, like Rayman and everything. But the big ones, the really big ones, especially Assassin's Creed in particular, which again we won't see for maybe this year, maybe next year.
All right.
Outside of those, the other ones are all sort of. I slightly hesitate to say that they're maybe getting a little stale in the minds of users. Like, how many Just Dances do you need?
Right.
You're going to get like 2022 or 2021. Do you really need 2023?
Well, it's like the same thing that happens with like the Guitar Hero franchise that I was a part of. But it's it's like you can only milk it so much before the what you expect from the experience is exactly what you got before, and the only thing you're really getting is a new set of songs, as opposed to ever investing on creating a platform that people could keep investing into. They created individual games on a yearly basis, hoping that it'd keep producing, or they could keep milking it. And I think maybe for some time they were able to ride like the success of the Switch and it's like sort of more of a casual platform. But the Switch is long in the tooth, and I think the Switch is even seeing some lagging sales now. And I think Ubisoft paid for it by putting basically their eggs in that basket.
Yep.
Most of them, at least.
Yeah. What do you think of? Do you think they're in trouble at all, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say they're in trouble because while they have, so they're doing the same thing a lot of other game companies are doing, which is going, we should have a games as a service platform where we can milk money from people. And the problem with that mentality is, you can't make a game that's like, this is what we're doing. We're going to make a game that's going to make tons of money, and we're going to spend tons of money in it to develop that platform, and then it's going to be successful. It's like that's not really a thing that works, and it's not true. And so they've developed maybe 3 or 4 games. I think they spent a good amount of money trying to recreate some sort of massive multiplayer game that's going to be able to create an economy around, and they'll be able to milk it for money for years without having to do the same sort of initial R&D to create a game. So they've done a bunch of initial R&D on a handful of games, and none of them have panned out for them. And meanwhile, their core IP has gone stale because they probably weren't investing enough in redeveloping what it means to be an Assassin's Creed game, which is something that they probably needed to do for quite some time. Basically do what God of War did with God of War 4, or the God of War reboot, soft reboot.
The PS4 God of War.
Yeah, the PS4 God of War, where it's like, hey, we can still have the storytelling and themes, but fundamentally change the way the game plays to make it for a more mature audience, and for making it for an audience that may be getting bored with the franchise. Because I think God of War Ascension did not do that well, which was after God of War 3. So they're in a point where I think they're trying to overmanage how to make games, and I still think game design and game development is still a slot machine, and a company like Ubisoft has some tools in its belt that allow it to de-risk some of its, slot machine behavior of producing and releasing a game, and that it has some strong IP. But I think it's abused its strong IP now, and that doesn't have the clout it needs to drive some massive multiplayer game. I think they'd be really hard pressed to create an Assassin's Creed game that's going to be a live service game and it do what they think it's going to do, or do what it needs to be able to do for them to make their money back. I couldn't imagine them going look, we now have a live service Assassin's Creed game and everybody should play it today. I'd probably look at it and go, no. Yeah. I'm okay with that. What I wanted was an Assassin's Creed game that kind of reinvented itself, because Valhalla is like a fourth in their reinvention when they did was it Origins, I believe, when they revamped ish and made the game more open world.
Yeah. Well, there was the Egypt one and there was the Greece one.
Yeah, that's right. So it was Egypt, Greece, and then Valhalla, Viking, Nordic stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But the one thing that you mentioned and I started chuckling about was, when they try to say we're gonna make a big game and it's gonna make a lot of money. That's our business plan. That reminded me of Sega's, I'm pretty sure it was Sega. They were saying we're gonna have that.
Their super game.
The super game, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Super game. It's like the super game business plan.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, maybe, as we mentioned in our last thing, maybe Sega will pull it off. I don't have confidence in it, given the way business and the games industry works. But
I feel like you can't make it. You can't invest hundreds of millions of dollars into a game that you expect to be a platform like that and actually have it succeed. It's like they end up getting overdeveloped. Whereas where you actually see these game services that actually succeed is when you have an independent development team that maybe has some venture backing and makes a game that costs $20 million to build.
Yeah.
and then they do like a soft release and they develop it out
Iterate.
with with community and take advantage of like making it free to play and partnering with Sony or whatever it is that they're doing, and then building it out from there. And you see a lot of success in that, but those are relatively small titles that balloon out as they sort of
Yeah.
find an audience. And if it fails, it fails as a $20 million game. It doesn't fail as a $150 million to $300 million game that Ubisoft put all of its money behind. And I don't know.
What seems like a missed opportunity here is that the indie space is also doing exactly what you just described. There's a lot of games that are coming out like, that try to be online, sort of massively multiplayer, build them up things. They soft launch on Steam with, early access. You can pay for access and then help contribute to feedback as the developers drop monthly updates or weekly, updates, and build up a following, build up a community.
And
this does not always
like an agile development
right.
process too.
Right.
Yeah.
And this doesn't always work. You hear about the success stories. What you don't necessarily hear about are the like 30 other ones that tried that same thing and failed for whatever reason.
Right.
So like this seems to me like a great space where Ubisoft or a big publisher, could come in and identify relatively early when something starts to get traction, and do the standard thing a publisher is supposed to do, and just come in and be like, hey, do you want to be published? And like we can work out a thing, and we'll gain you as an IP and take you on as a second party developer or whatever, and build out the service like hardcore. Maybe I don't know why that isn't happening. Maybe it's because they don't own everything and they're at this stage too big to consider that kind of thing. But
you might actually see it as what they're doing now, which is saying like we have to cut back, 7 AAA titles now because we don't have the faith that they're going to be able to do what they need to do, and we're going to have to cut $200 million in costs so that we can refocus what we're doing as a studio / publisher. But I don't know. They still release a good amount of games per year, but most of them are like the B titles and not the AAAs.
Right.
So
I mean,
yeah. I think maybe what happens is like, Microsoft considers buying them, but I don't think Microsoft's in a position where they should or could try buying Ubisoft, not because they couldn't afford it, but because they can't afford that look when they're trying to buy Activision right now.
Yeah,
so
it is given that and the drop in 14%, which isn't that bad, and it may have changed even since the drop of 14%. I haven't looked at the numbers recently.
Yeah, it was like $4 a share at the last
on Wednesday. Yeah, actually, it was only yesterday.
Yeah,
so it's likely not much has changed since then, but
nor should I don't think they've announced a plan that would correct investors' expectations. So
yeah, no, they're holding right now at $4.42. Which is their fall yesterday. They ended the day at let's see, that would have been $4.39, and they're holding steady at 441, 442.
Yeah.
So
and if you have faith that the Ubisoft can figure this stuff out, or that they get bought out at some point, it may not be a bad time to invest. Although, I think the only company that could legitimately or reasonably consider buying Ubisoft is Microsoft, and I don't think Microsoft would dare do it right now.
Yeah, which is funny. Their market capitalization, at least on the Dow Jones, I think they're also listed in a number of other international markets, but at least in the Dow Jones, it appears that they're wherever. I think it was Dow Jones.
That's where the company is.
Well, they're French.
Yeah, they are French, but there's a side company, but it's a different type of holding that's done in the French exchange where the ownership, it's like the Guillemont's stock holding is there, but they're holders of Ubisoft stock, so it's like buying a holder that owns like whatever it is, 40% of the Ubisoft stock.
Yeah, there's a thing called Ubisoft Entertainment SA in the European markets. At any rate, their market capitalization here in the US is like 2.88 billion, which is a drop in the bucket compared to the Activision Blizzard purchase and buyout. And in fact, I think even it's a drop in the bucket compared to the ZeniMax Bethesda buyout. Relatively, I thought it was like 7 or.
I think billion. Bethesda was a 7 billion. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah, something like that. So it's still less than that, but it's not to say that Ubisoft is necessarily for sale right now. It depends on what
I mean,
Eve's.
they could just do a straight up, you know, stock purchase.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true. That's
but
true. And
um,
gain. Yeah.
usually, what has to happen is they have to pay money, and then and then the basically the people who are holding the stock have to get paid out of their ownership for it. But in so that like the stock price value is not going to be what someone like Sony or Microsoft would actually pay for it.
Yeah.
But again, I don't think Microsoft will be in a position to do it if they really dearly want to have the Activision deal go through. They can't like suddenly go, well, we also want to buy Ubisoft. Had this been reversed and they tried buying Ubisoft first, they might have been able to get that deal to go through, and then they would be challenging the Activision. But whatever.
So I just looked at their Wikipedia page has over 50 subsidiary companies as part of Ubisoft. So
No,
yeah,
they own a lot of IP. That's the
Yeah.
thing that's interesting about them, but they just don't know how to manage it currently. So
Yeah.
well, let's move on to the next news piece, which actually kind of segues from what I was just saying when it comes to Microsoft buying
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Ubisoft. Do you
Yep.
want to cover this one?
Sure. The UK's Competition and Markets Authority, the CMA, has extended its investigation into the Microsoft Activision Blizzard deal. They are continuing. So previously, the CMA, we reported on this in the past. They claimed that they were going to do a report, and I think by the end of this month, January, something like that, they were going to have their report come out about their recommendation as to whether to or not to allow that deal to go through, citing potential issues with the concerns about the market's ability to compete if Microsoft were able to control some of the biggest IPs in the industry, for instance, Call of Duty. It turns out that they have just announced that they are going to be punting that due date for their report until April of this year. So they're giving themselves a bit more time to continue digging into it. What do you think about the extension? It's an extra 3 months for them to do. Do you have thoughts on what?
Yeah, and apparently it was because they're like the arguments being made by Sony and Microsoft at this point in time need more time. And I think Microsoft has been shooting itself in the foot a few times now with their publicly related release statements. Like I think it was I think it was with the I'm blanking on the regulatory body in the U.S. that's looking at this. FTC.
Yes, Federal Trade Commission.
Yeah, I think it was the FTC that is looking at whether or not they're abusing or this type of purchase would be anti-competitive, anti-consumer to the industry at large. I think the FTC had came out swinging, basically saying like we're not in favor of this, and we have serious concerns. And Microsoft came out and was like, "You don't have standing," and they had to roll back that statement. I think they publicly said, "Yeah, we probably shouldn't have made that statement." Now, and what was weird about the whole thing is between EU, the UK, and the US, which are all taking this fairly seriously, and I think we've discussed it before, where we say, yeah, there's good reason to take this seriously. And we can talk about that a little bit, but I think at this point, the arguments that Microsoft has to make to say, actually, we're addressing the core concerns that the UK is providing. I think that's what the extension is about, is basically like, you want to stop putting your foot in your mouth, go for it. What is it that you can actually provide us that says this addresses our concerns? And to be clear, the CMA's core concerns was that given the sort of what's the best way to say this? They have every layer of like tech. So they have the tech stack themselves, they have the IP, and with this sort of like lateral
Vertical.
dominance in this sort of market that it's dangerous. It's dangerous in terms of anti-competitiveness and anti-consumer. If Microsoft is allowed to just sort of like steamroll the whole thing.
Yeah. To be
And go ahead.
to restate some of that, the CMA and well, Microsoft in particular, and to an extent Sony and the journalistic enterprise have made a big thing about this whole thing. They're saying, "Oh, it's all about Call of Duty," but that's not at all what it's all about. That is to be fair, that is a very big part of it. But the CMA in particular, and I think the FTC have specific, and for sure the EU have called out concerns about Microsoft owning the IP, owning the hardware and the
Cloud services.
Yeah, but before that, even like the whole Xbox platform.
Yeah. Okay.
And then of course the cloud, as you mentioned, the cloud services layer that runs on top of for Xbox for this future service thing. And if they're allowed to have all three of those things and can then basically set their own price because they're the only ones with that IP, they're the only ones with, who also have a game console platform with their own APIs and everything to control like hardware rendering and all that other stuff, and have the ability to have a whole subsidized cloud platform, subsidized because they're also making money on it through another way. And they have to build those resources anyway. How is anyone else going to even approach that unless they're already a multi-billion-dollar company that's successful in some other vertical or in a competition with Microsoft today? That leaves a very small list of companies who might be able to match that. And the concern here is that Sony, who Microsoft keeps saying they're in the lead, we're the small fry. They're just as Justin and I have suggested, maybe they're not quite big enough to do that, like to have to build out a global cloud platform,
or drop $68 billion on a publisher.
Right. Yeah. Just be like, oh, we're going to own them. Like who's going to outbid on that level of thing. So yeah. Anyway, that's the aspect that we want to highlight because a lot of the time it gets glossed over and everyone makes a big deal about Call of Duty.
Yeah. And I think that's the biggest concern here is like if you listen to like Twitter or even YouTube and look at some of the more like punditry focused fans that comment on this, they're just like, oh, like Sony does this all the time, or Sony has its own set of games. Like, yeah, but it's not the fact that it's Microsoft owning Call of Duty. It's Microsoft having like 1/3 of all game IPs plus the tech stack. And everything else to do this. And it's like I think the best like example would be is like looking at how Uber kind of took over the taxi industry. And the concern there that was never really addressed is that, okay, if Uber comes into a city and it offers a service, basically it is offering a service at the cost of investors who are giving them billions of dollars, and they give you artificially low taxi prices. And then suddenly you start using that platform, and all the taxi service that own medallions and existed before then have to shut down, lay off staff, etc. At the point in which there is no taxi service anymore and it's just Uber, Uber then goes, all right, those artificially low prices, they're 2-3 times that. And actually, when there's a weather event, now the taxis are 5-6 times that or whatever it else. And then suddenly you're going, if I need to get anywhere in a city that, relies on public transportation and taxi services to get me door to door opposed to having a car, I am now owned by Uber, and they set the price at which it gets me door to door service because they have the whole thing. And this is the same look at, like, this is what they're talking about with Microsoft is like, although Sony's competitive in this space and maybe Steam is as well, the main concern here is that with Microsoft's might in this area, they could steamroll the sort of game streaming services, and then once it's steamrolled and no one else can compete in that area, that's when they can set the prices however they want. And the only thing that keeps that from happening right now is either regulators or Microsoft deciding not to. And although right now Microsoft is like on best behavior and acting much better than they have in the past, and in some ways is a role model to how we'd want other major game publishers to behave, it's how long is it going to be like that? Like, at what point do they, start leveraging their power and start doing things that is anti-competitive, but at the point in which you don't have a choice anymore? I think
Mhm.
that's what the core idea is behind this, and I don't think it should be sort of, oh, it's just a Call of Duty thing, and Microsoft is super smart for giving Nintendo a 10-year deal or something. It's like, I don't think that's the point. And I think the CMA and to the um, FTC and the UK regulatory body, like, that's not the point. So
Yep.
I don't know. What are your feelings on it? I just diatribe there.
No, I mean, I had done a little bit earlier too, but I think I agree with that assessment, and the one thing you made a comparison there to, I'm blanking on the comparison. Oh, taxis. My thinking went to, the whole antitrust, monopolistic practices, I guess, that anti-competitive practices of Apple and Google in the app stores
Yeah.
for the mobile devices. And I'm thinking about the content there. Apple, yeah, sure, they produce their own apps, but they're not going out and buying all the biggest app producers that are cross-platform and then closing them off potentially to make it so you have to. The only way to access them is to go through the app store. They built this thing up, and it has grown organically in that way, and now is so big that companies are struggling to continue to make money and find ways to make money without having to fork over a huge percentage to Apple, and Google, to be fair, in those situations. And that's why they're saying this is anti-competitive, because like Google and Apple just sort of agreed that 30% now is the going rate. There's no competition there. They're not trying to undercut each other on the percent that they're taking. They just said, like,
anything,
30%
there's been
is
collusion
great.
with
Right.
to some degree that they've indicated.
Even if it's just, like Google saying, yeah, 30% seems like a good deal. Like, we didn't even have to talk to Apple. They just set the price and we said, yeah, us too.
Yeah.
Like, so there's, Epic has come through at least on the game side and tried to say we're undercutting. We only charge 12%, which is a much smaller fee, but then they can't install their app or their service onto mobile devices. Like, great. That this gets into the nitty gritty of another space. But the comparison I'm trying to draw here is Apple. If you think of Apple and say Apple has an ecosystem and a platform, yes, and that's similar in a way to Microsoft with their ecosystem and a platform of Xbox and the Xbox Live service, or not Xbox Live, Game Pass service. That's similar. What Microsoft is doing here that is raising concerns that Apple hasn't done yet, as far as I'm aware, is gone ahead and said, oh, we're going to also just buy up all the content and stick it on our platform.
Right.
It's as though Netflix, had not only done deals to get all of its content, but it bought out all the studios and movie companies, or large ones, put them on its own platform, and owned the hardware, like the cloud platform that they were built on, which they might own much of that now. I don't know. But they did the whole vertical and did everything themselves. And you had to go through Netflix, and Netflix owned literally a third or more of the content you wouldn't be able to access.
Yeah, I mean, I think the closest comparison is like at Netflix's height, like say they were able to go ahead and buy Sony and Warner Brothers and the likes of those,
Sony movie, by the way.
Yeah, like they're either movie IP, and go ahead and walk away with that. Like, who would have been able to compete with Netflix? Of course, those movie studios were part of much larger companies, and so like that sort of thing was impossible. And having Netflix do that was impossible. Like, this is not the same thing with Microsoft. Microsoft is able to buy things like Activision outright as, like, I think the second largest publisher, if not the first largest publisher.
Yeah,
I think the Activision was at.
Tencent might actually be bigger now. Globally.
Tencent in revenue, I don't think in publishing power.
Tencent owns a shocking amount of.
It owns a shocking amount of minority share, and then some majority share in some companies. So it's like it's hard to weigh Tencent on its like market cap versus its actual publishing power. So its publishing power, I don't think it was up there. Well, I think it's up there in like the top 10, but I think like the largest publishers in the world were like
for wholly owned IP.
2K. Those were the two largest. EA, I think, slightly behind that. And then, it went down from there. And I think now Microsoft, especially if the Activision deal goes through, they're either one or two.
Yeah.
So I think they're only behind 2K at this point, and 2K is really like their growth is really because of the stupid success of GTA Online.
Yes.
Yeah,
I was trying to remember what game they did. Because I always think of Rockstar as being like a
yeah,
thing
their
they
own,
do
but yeah, they're all
their
in
own.
2K, and yeah, 2K's because I don't know, it's like 2K as a publisher, Rockstar is the thing that's like a huge cash cow for them, and then the
Oh yeah,
remainder of their IP catalog is
yeah,
like they haven't made a BioShock game in
yeah. Rockstar makes Grand Theft Auto, that series, as well as Red Dead Redemption and what was
Bully,
the
I
other?
guess would be the
Bully. Yeah.
yeah. And it's really now it's a GTA company at this point.
Well, they did Red Dead Redemption 2 was relatively recent. They're still selling that.
Yeah, of course they're still selling it, but it's like I think like the amount of purchases of GTA 5
Yeah.
is over like 110 million.
Yeah, there's something dumb.
It's some yeah, exactly. It's
Yeah.
some stupid amount of ownership of that, and that probably doesn't include. I think GTA Online has gone free to play in a couple times. The GTA 5 game is not, but like they've been doing this weird back and forth. Anyways,
Yeah.
yeah, Microsoft being able to buy Activision outright, I think, is a huge problem, and I do not think we should rely on just Microsoft's like good faith or even 10-year contracts as like a sign that this is they're definitely going to handle this well. Like, why is it so important that they own Activision in the first place? Like, if it wasn't that important to them and they're willing to sign $10 million contracts with them or 10-year contracts like Nintendo and Sony, it's like, then why, right? Like, clearly it's an important strategic purchase for their future prospects and how they're going to handle their streaming service. I think that's why it's important to them, and I think regulatory bodies need to not hand wave away like the threat to what it means for the game industry.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to stop talking about that. We also talked about this like 1.5 million times. So
Yeah,
let's talk.
because there keeps being more news about it.
Yeah,
Or more announcements, and it's such a big potential impact on our industry that like we like to cover it.
and it's a
So,
pet peeve of mine to see people who are just like, it's going to go through. Microsoft just like like totally squash like Sony because they were just at a $10 10-year deal. It's just like, that's not the point. Like, it's not a Sony versus Microsoft thing. It's how do you want like our streaming future of gaming to be? Because at some point that will be the future, and if it's just Microsoft, it's not going to be a good day.
Right.
So.
Yeah, we're going to struggle truck for a while.
Yeah, I also think it means bad things for like what it means for publishers and how publishers get games released in that future. Like diversity and choice in that space is important, and the prospect of like Microsoft buying their way to like publisher number 2 or 1 is a little scary. All right, now I'll really stop talking about it. Let's talk about some good things about Microsoft.
Yeah. Switching to fun news for Microsoft.
Yeah. So Microsoft kicks off this year with an Xbox Direct. Actually, I think they call it an Xbox
Developer
Publisher.
Direct.
Yeah, Developer Direct. Which is interesting, and we'll talk about that. Eric, I'll let you kind of talk about those pieces, but I'll go through the recap.
Sure.
So to give it some context, since there was no E3 in 2022, we've kind of been on this weird like press diet where Xbox did their publisher like direct thing during what was E3. It was Summer Game Fest from Jeff Keighley, but they did their own press event there. Sony didn't. Nintendo did as well. And during that press event, we saw a couple games from Microsoft that we only saw like pre-renders of. One was Redfall, which I think during that press event they actually showed off a good amount of Redfall. They re-showed off, I think, Halo, which was
go ahead.
It had an imminent release last year. I think they released in late summer or something like that. So they're like, look, Halo doesn't look as bad as it used to. And we didn't get a lot from a bunch of other games that we were kind of expecting. So in a weird turn, they're first at the gate this year to say like, hey, we've got a press event. So on January 25th, Microsoft and Bethesda are doing a partnership press event. This is how they've been doing it for the past 2 years since they bought ZeniMax. Like they have like these Bethesda, Microsoft, or Xbox Game Studios pressers. But it's going to be a developer show, and they're going to show off the slate of Microsoft Studios games. In these, they're going to be kind of doing gameplay showcases, so it's a bit different than we've gotten before. Usually with Microsoft in the past couple of years, it's been like pre-rendered videos or like sizzle reel type trailers. This they're promising we're going to give you extended gameplay. We're going to have the developers talking about the game, and what they announced specifically was that Mojang's going to be there with Minecraft Legends. Minecraft Legends is the Minecraft-based game, but it's like an adventure game instead of like a open world
big building
survival builder thing. Arcane Austin will be there, and they're going to be showing off more Redfall. Although that's the game I think that got the most attention in like the Summer Games Fest. They're going to show it off again because it's due out sometime early this year. Turn 10 is going to show off Forza Motorsports, which again is also due early this year. So another big title. And I think it's going to be our first real look at it. Again, we saw a showcase, sizzle reel thing in summer, but I think they'll actually probably show like real gameplay of it running and what to expect there. And then ZeniMax is going to be showing off Elder Scrolls Online, which is less impressive. Elder Scrolls Online has been around for a while now, so I more content packages, probably graphical updates, but we've got ZeniMax showing that. They didn't say anything about surprises, but I would assume that they will have some sort of surprise for a big press event like this. I think the oddest part of this whole thing is that Starfield, which was supposed to have an early 2023 release. Then at the end of it was supposed to have a 2022 end of year release. Then it got bumped to spring 2023, and then it got another delay recently. That's like, it's going to be 2020. It's going to be early 2023, but still no one knows exactly what that means and when that date is set for. The odd part is we won't have a Starfield showcase. At least they didn't announce one, and so we're not going to get an additional view of Starfield. So a little weird. It's supposed to be within this like lineup of games, but I don't know.
Yeah, Starfield's a weird one because what they showed, it's been so hyped for so long, and then they showed it at the Summer Fest thing last year, and I personally walked away very underwhelmed.
Yeah,
from what they showed, particularly.
A lot of people are pretty hyped from what they saw, but I think that the fact of the matter is that Todd Howard, right?
I'm not sure.
The owner of it,
no idea
of Bethesda. Is it Todd Howard? Or is that the guy who owns Epic?
Todd Howard is head of Bethesda.
Okay, yeah. I had the right name in my head. Okay, yep. Todd Howard, when they showed off Starfield in the Summer Games Fest, was promising like thousands of planets with content on it and all this other stuff. And so everybody's like, either they're really far ahead, or they are over-promising and under-delivering, or they are not going to hit their dates. And so far, it looks like they're not hitting their dates. And it has, like I said, it's got a nebulous 2023, or first half of 2023 release date. I don't know if that's fiscal 2023 for Microsoft, or if it's like calendar release year.
Get to play those games.
Yeah. And the fact that it's not going to be at the showcase is a bit telling. But again, who knows? Bethesda is headlining it with Microsoft, and Bethesda proper is not there. ZeniMax is with Elder Scrolls, which is a Bethesda property, but it's not a Bethesda published game. So
there are reports that they're planning a separate show for that game in particular.
Yeah, and it wouldn't be surprising that they would do that maybe like 2 or 3 months to like kick off the pre-orders.
The big hype train.
I think they already did pre-orders though. Now I'm trying to remember if they kicked off pre-orders in summer.
Yeah, I don't know. I would also suggest that certain companies, like if they still operate this way, who is it? For a while, went back in 20 years ago when I worked at over 20 years ago now when I worked at GameStop. They would take, you could walk in and say, I want to pre-order the PS7, and they'd say, okay, give us $10 down and we'll give you a slip. Yeah.
You're chump. Don't lose this. Yeah.
I remember when the PS2 was coming out, people were pre-ordering the PS3.
Yeah, I guess, but like for Bethesda, what they've done with like Fallout,
they have the collector's edition things, and
they do the big collector's edition and go like, hey, look, it's open for pre-order, 3 hours from now, and our servers are gonna be slammed. I don't know if they did that with Starfield. I want to say I recall like seeing some sort of special edition, but I don't think there was. So if that wasn't the case, then I would presume that they would have some sort of press event, either this one in that they didn't announce it, or its own event where they'll go, we'll actually show off all the capabilities of this game. We'll show you in more in depth of like what a character creator looks like, what the ship creator looks like, opposed to them just announcing features and then show like what the special editions can be pre-ordered for. But like I said, it was like I can't quite remember if they did that in summer. Anyways,
they did have it on pre-order, and it looks like
Did they have special editions though?
Not that I can see.
Yeah, because like
Starfield, that's it.
Yeah, and what I'm really expecting is like one of their big special editions, like they've done with the Fallout series, like where they had, I think they had the what's it called? I'm blanking on the name of it.
The Vault edition or something like that.
They had the Vault editions, but they had like, in each one they actually like these big special edition pieces. So one they had like the power armor helmet, which that was for some Fallout 76. Is it called 76? Yeah,
Fallout 76.
Yeah. Pip-Boy. They had the Pip-Boy arm piece for like Fallout 3, and Fallout 4 had, I don't know, something else. The point of all that is they have these big special editions. I couldn't recall if they had done it for Summer Games Fest. But yeah, to your point of whether or not they're going to do their own showcase, I'd imagine they would, where they show off like their big special edition, and
it'd be a
that's
big
when they would like make it available for pre-order at that point.
Yeah, have a landing page. At least say like for pre-orders of the special edition, go to this page, and you go to this website, and then you can see the options.
Yeah,
which is exactly what Blizzard did for Diablo 4 pre-order stuff.
Yeah, and it's what they've done with every single big Bethesda game. Like, what is it? Elder Scrolls. Oh God, I'm blanking. I should have written these down and I didn't. The last big Elder Scrolls game.
Oh, Skyrim.
Skyrim. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, the big dragon you could get. That was like a super special edition, but they had a big dragon statue. Yeah, so they've been doing this for a while. I imagine they do it again. And usually when they announce the big pre-orders in those special editions, they've got a giant press event with it too. So yeah. Anyways, anything notable about this in that the change in tact?
The first if it's not clear, Microsoft had previously been most of their I think, let me back up. Especially in 2020 and 2021, their big announcement videos, because everyone's moved to these instead of in lieu of E3, they have videos where they showcase lots of trailers and whatnot.
Like non-live events.
Right. They show pre-recorded lists of hey, here's what's going on. We're going to talk to Microsoft executives and have them sort of awkwardly joke around and introduce the next game. They would do that, and then they would showcase something that was clearly put together by a marketing department that was all pre-rendered footage and didn't show anything with the actual game. And they didn't mention on the bottom that, hey, this is not actual in-game footage. And people, us included, made comments about this that were somewhat disparaging because they're sort of setting expectations incorrectly and are unfairly sort of playing with the audience expectations. That opposed to Sony, who did it right. And whenever they would have footage, they would say captured on a PlayStation 5 or, pre-rendered footage, actual gameplay footage may change or be different. There's a little bit of text at the bottom that lets you know what you're looking at and gives you that context. And this is important because several games over the last, since game trailers were a thing, have incorrectly set the expectations for game customers, who then get really upset
Yeah.
and make special videos that showcase, here's what you told us we would get, and here's the little turd that we actually got.
Yeah.
Right, like the shiny golden nugget and the little poopy. So they make unfortunate comparisons like that. And in many ways, we were seeing that in 2020 and 2021 with Microsoft. 2022, they seem to slightly be changing their approach. They did start to do like mark it up with hey, this is pre-rendered, or this is actual in-game footage, etc., etc. This now, though, seems like they're taking a page out of Nintendo's playbook, and where the whole Direct name, right? Nintendo Direct is a thing that Nintendo's been doing for years now, and that's how they make these announcements and they present these things. It gives them a space to highlight their own first-party and second-party titles. And as well, if they want, they can bring in third-party titles and do sort of a state of the platform type thing, and they all go under the umbrella of Nintendo Direct. In this case, it feels like, I'm not exactly sure why they're calling it Developer Direct and not just Xbox Direct or Microsoft Direct, whatever. Yeah. But everyone, like, all the shorthand term that people are using is Xbox Direct. So yeah. Like, it may just be a self-fulfilling prophecy there, but it's sort of taking on that framework and that sort of window, which is very much more involved in the studio itself. At least that's how it's presented. Of course, we haven't seen this yet because it won't air until Wednesday, the 25th of January. But our hope is, based on what we saw mid-2022 from them and the format that they seem to be emulating from Nintendo, that this is going to be a much more simple and straightforward demo of content based on what they've described it as well. It sounds like it's that format where, as you pointed out, they're going to give gameplay. Yes, there will be trailers, but they're actually going to sit down and have gameplay footage where someone is playing through a part of the game, and you get to see and experience what that is before the game is completed and shipped, of course. But you get, that's a great way to set expectations and get people excited about what they're actually going to get their hands on.
Yeah. And to be fair to Microsoft too, they had the excuse me, they had the unenviable task of trying to launch an Xbox Series X after just acquiring a bunch of new studios and having almost no content for it, but still having to get people's interest in it. So in 2020, when they had their like showcase, I think there was like less than 10% of it was actual gameplay. And we also got announcements for games that we still haven't heard anything from, including like a new Elder Scrolls, Obsidian's Elder Scrolls like game. It includes things like Fable. So those games. And then I think there was actually another Rare game that looked really interesting, but we found later that was on like, rocky terrain and was not, developing the way they expected it to. And so they had the task of putting forward something to get people's interest in it, and none of it could actually be gameplay because there was no game to show off.
They also, I believe, if I recall correctly on the timing, they also had not yet announced that the Xbox Series console, the next gen Xbox, was going to be split into two different versions of varying degrees of capabilities.
Yeah, might have been at that point. I can't quite remember.
I think it was rumored. Strong rumors were out about it. They're like the nickname for the or the development code name for the Series S had been sort of leaked, and there were developers who had commented about, well, if this were a thing, it would be a real pain in the bottom, and that had effectively been where the conversation had ended, is my understanding. But and I could have the timeline wrong on that, but my recollection watching it was, this is pretty cool. I wonder what the specs are going to be like. And so they still hadn't announced, here's the Xbox Series X and the Series S, and here's the differences.
Yeah, I think their biggest sin with that initial presentation wasn't so much that they did what they had to like get some interest in the Xbox, but that they just didn't clearly label what you were actually seeing, whether it was gameplay or pre-rendered footage. And I think in the case of which they were showing off during that period of time was like, no, all of it was pre-rendered. I think Halo was the only one that got like a long form trailer, and that one got like, people looked at them like,
they ripped it apart. Yeah. Yeah. Also, isn't Halo Infinite was a cross-gen title too, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like again, they did not have an easy task at that point in time. Like they just
No.
didn't have their studios ready, like which is a bit different than Sony at the time, which
Yeah.
I had been using its internal studios to develop a lot of stuff. And that first year of PlayStation, or the first 2 years of PlayStation, you know, had like we've been graced with some a handful of AAA titles. Although a lot of them were cross gen, they were still high quality titles that they could show off and be like, this is what you're going to get on your PS5. So yeah, I mean the change in tact is nice here because you claimed it as like kind of Nintendo, but I also feel it's kind of like Sony, where Sony has like kind of pioneered the like you're gonna get 5 minutes, 10 minutes of just us playing a game.
Yeah.
Fairly early on, they did that with Last of Us 1. They did with Last of Us 2. They did it with a handful of other games where they're just like, here's a vertical slice and you can see us playing through it. So you're gonna get a really clear idea about what kind of game you're gonna be playing, 2-3 years from now. Now these games are releasing this year, so it's not quite the same, but still, it's nice to see this change.
Yeah. Yep. And we'll see if the whatever Starfield presentation is also going to get a developer direct.
I mean, they already kind of had one though, right? Like in Summer Games Fest, I think they showed like some long form gameplay footage.
They showed, my recollection of it was a few stitched together scenes, like of exploring one area, and there was the one thing that I remember watching being like, is that the gameplay? was like it was you and maybe two other people, like, and running around in third person, or maybe it was first person, I can't remember, but like shooting shotguns at each other on a space station. And I was like,
yeah, it was basically it was like the guy runs up the stairs and he's like, it's doing what you do in Fallout or
Elder like any of those games. And I was like, why is this what we've waited so like everyone is like just dying to see? Like I don't know. It perhaps I was more the expectations I have are probably way too high, given
and honestly, I think Bethesda has to deliver. Like they're making a game based off of their engines that have existed for quite some time and have been updated over the same amount of time. But like,
I mean, it also sounds like what they're trying to do is deliver a game that somewhat already exists to an extent, right? Like we have No Man's Sky. Yeah, it's an indie game. But it is this huge open world thing, and it was panned when it first came out, and then over years of continuous development has finally reached that point of basically what they were describing. Now they were saying like, it's going to be, it sounds like No Man's Sky, except with our like type of content.
And I think they're also promising like a more in-depth story, which it's more mixed. I don't know. I guess. Depending on whether you like Bethesda's storytelling, but that sort of layer on it. So it'd be like No Man's Sky meets Skyrim, and with thematically No Man's Sky, the openness potentially of No Man's Sky.
1,000 planets. Like, how are you gonna make content for 1,000?
That's the thing that I like when they said that. I'm like, I do not understand how they're going to have, Fallout / Elder Scrolls like content on 1,000 planets. Like if you played Outer Worlds, Outer Worlds, they had it like a narrow scope and it was successful. Like, okay, you go to this planet and there's these areas that you can go to. It's not a full planet. It's
little set pieces.
Area. And so it's basically a way to level warp. And they're like, no, you can land anywhere on the planet and just go. And it's like, that's quite a lot of promise. And I do not know how they're going to pull that off.
Just fill the world. All 1,000 worlds are just full of nothing but fetch quests,
or like barren landscapes to like run around on. Like maybe you can hover over the planet and find like a point of interest and then land near that point of it. Like I don't know. What they showed off in that gameplay during Games Fest was, I guess, if you were a fan of their content, is compelling. The scope that Todd Howard announced, I was just like, maybe they can pull it off. Like, crazier things have happened in the game industry, but that's an awful lot of promise, and I do not know how they're going to land on time. And I mean, I guess we'll see. Do you think there's anything peculiar about this press event, or any surprises from what they've announced so far?
Not as special. I mean, to me, it was more the sort of openness and frankness with which it was um, announced,
Yeah,
and just how they're like, "Hey, we're going to show off these games. Come check it out."
yeah,
Which is refreshing. It's not like you're sitting there guessing, like, "Oh, is it going to be this? Is it going to be that?" And to also say, "Hey, we're going to be showing off Redfall. We're going to have a whole segment after, like, stay for the directs, but then afterwards, we're going to show a long form cut of someone actually playing Redfall."
yeah,
Which, like, that's super refreshing. Listening when you consider in the past, a lot of the times with Microsoft in particular, you get the pre-rendered little videos, and it's like, okay, they
yeah,
got
yeah.
it's hard to get excited about basically movie trailers for games that are not at all about what the actual content is of the game, other than, like, you and I go back and forth about this a lot right now, about it's hard for at least us to get excited about a Final Fantasy game because Square Enix's trailers are a steaming pile of mess and basically meaninglessness.
Yeah, I mean they're like
There's
words.
no hint of story of the world. You hear, like, some random voice say some platitude over a dark screen with text on it, and then a shine like, "Oh, look, we have Bahamut again."
Yeah,
like, okay,
yeah,
what am I supposed to get excited about here? It says Final Fantasy. Okay, like, you've sort of, we were talking early at the top of the show about being a little bit burned out on certain IP. Well,
yeah, and that's one of them, right?
yeah,
Uh, I feel bad for the people who are like still fans of that series. I mean, they're for
yeah,
good reasons. Like, I guess it's sort of like Sony figured out to let the content and the development team speak for themselves by just
yeah,
showing like what they've developed. And I think it's something Microsoft has clearly struggled with, and it feels like it's like they're at odds with their internal like Microsoft marketing teams, as I think as we mentioned, where it's like you get this
yeah.
very corporate, buzzwordy like lineup of marketing event, and I think a lot of gamers like see through it and go like that's not what I'm looking for, and it doesn't really do it for me. Um, and that sort of what happens with the Square Enix, like whatever their marketing team's doing, it just doesn't work for, well, it doesn't work for me. I don't think it works for a lot of gamers, and they're really kind of like hedging it on their IP. It's probably why they have trouble like launching something like Forspoken, which like
Yeah.
they just can't get people interested in it, because it's a brand new IP that doesn't have the clout of like Final Fantasy to like overcome bad marketing.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it's nice to see Microsoft's kind of figuring stuff out.
Yeah, and my hope is that the games, as they're good, well, assuming that the games are good, well, let me back up. I hope A, the games are great, and that B, they do them justice with these shows,
Yeah,
and they actually get fans and people excited, because it's always exciting to have new amazing games to look forward to in the industry, even if you don't have the platform. What it means is that something there is going to filter into the rest of the games and improve the state of games in the industry across the board.
yeah,
Developers are also gamers and pick up on what works and what doesn't, and try to iterate on it in different ways. So it's always exciting to see something that someone has tried that's new and fresh, and that might filter
yeah.
into the rest of the games that we all play.
Yeah, it's like it was like this past week or the week before. I think Neil Druckmann was talking about playing Elden Ring,
Yeah,
and he was like, "I love how you can just tell story without telling story, right? Like you
yeah,
go into an environment, and the environment sort of gives you the narrative you need." This is actually why I loved Fallout 3 so much, because I think they did a really good job in that game, and I think it kind of wasn't as successful in Skyrim, and then certainly not in Fallout 4. But like that sort of storytelling where it's just like you kind of go out and you discover things, and that tells you a story. And to your point, this is Neil Druckmann going, "Hey, there's something really special with what Elden Ring is doing, and this is something that they may adopt into future Naughty Dog games." Like I don't know, they don't really make open world games, at least not yet. But it's interesting to see him talk about how it's important to also tell story by exploration and discovery, and not just narrative, like verbal narrative.
Which, to be fair, they do in those games as well. If you were going to ask me, like, what's a great atmospheric, a game where the story is told at least in part through the environment, I would say the Last of Us series for sure.
Yeah.
But at the same token, this is the director of those games saying that he's picking up something else from another game, and that
There's
just
more to be learned.
Right. No one is going to ever be the have it perfect. There's always going to be ways to iterate and improve, and it's great to have that ability. So if Microsoft can come through and really highlight and get the interesting bits of their upcoming games, get people excited, make them a success, it's good for everybody.
Yeah.
So
so I guess stay tuned for January 25th for their direct, and I'm hoping Sony announces something, because I would really like to know what to expect this year from Sony.
Yeah,
that's one big mystery.
Time will tell. Yeah.
All right. Well then, thanks for following along and watching the show. If you like this content, like and subscribe. It does help us. But otherwise, we'll talk to you guys, or we'll be on again next week, Thursday at 6 p.m. Eastern.
Looking forward to it.
Take care, everybody.
See ya.
And this is going to be a slow stop.